Hi, this is Bastiaan, and this is the annotation of an old game I played using the Parham attack, or the patzer opening, against an engine called Gambit Fruit. And Gambit Fruit, of course, is a fruit engine, and a very strong variation of fruit, especially in blitz play. And the Parham attack is an opening where white develops his queen prematurely. And normally this is a bad idea, but in the case of the Parham attack, um, the opening cannot be refuted, and in fact black must develop in a way against the mate threats and attacks of white, and this makes it an excellent opening to use against players with a high opening book theory but low chess skill, because the game will be determined by the better chess player in the middle game or the end game. So let's start the game. The game starts with e4, e5, now queen to h5, the Parham attack. And of course this attacks the pawn on f7, and we can see that the diagonal is open for the bishop to attack f7 as well. Now there are a lot of ways to defend against it, and a few poor defenses as well. So if you're playing against the dumbest person on the planet, he will play king to e7. Now white can play queen takes pawn on e5 checkmate, which is the fastest checkmate possible in chess. So this just gives you an idea of the threats that are possible. Of course, no one will play that. g6 to try and chase away the queen doesn't work, because after queen takes pawn, check, perhaps queen blocks, we can see that black will lose the rook. So those two defenses cannot be played, but there are a lot of other defenses possible. Black may play a gambit, let's say knight to f6, sacrificing the pawn on e5, queen takes pawn check, bishop blocks, and we can see that black is ready to castle and chase away the queen with knight to c6. And although black is down a pawn, this position is more or less equal, so I consider this a valid defense against it. What else is possible? Something that is rarely seen is a reversed Parham defense, where black plays queen to f6. So whereas white develops his queen to attack both pawns, black can develop his queen to protect those two pawns. And if white continues with bishop to c4, we can see that there are two attackers but also two defenders. And in fact, the Parham attack has been refuted. What else is possible? d6 is a valid defense, protecting the pawn, and after bishop to c4, now black can play g6, queen to f3 to keep the pressure on f7, and knight to f6. That's also valid defense, refuting the Parham attacking idea. The most common reply is knight to c6, and this is the move that was played in the game. So bishop to c4, attacking f7. Of course, the queen cannot be chased away with, say, knight to f6, or we can get a mate on f7, but simply g6, and the queen is forced away, and it will find a new home on f3, again keeping the pressure. And we can see that we are forcing black to develop in a way to counter these mating threats, even though they are easily refuted. Now knight to f6 is played, and this is basically the end of the Parham attacking idea, and you're left with equal play without further opening theory, where the best player will win the game. Now I've seen people suggest the move g4, with the idea to advance to g5 and chase away the knight. Of course, if the knight is chased away, we get a mate. And this is perhaps the poorest continuation possible for white in the Parham attack, because now black can play knight to d4, attacking the queen and threatening a fork with knight takes pawn on c2. Queen to d1 to protect that pawn and still protect the pawn on g4. And now d5, attacking the bishop and adding a second attacker on the pawn on g4. And we can see that white is in a lot of trouble. The queen has made a humiliating retreat. There are two defenders on this pawn, and there are two attacks against white. So let's see what white can do. All continuations are losing. Let's say if pawn takes pawn, then black can continue with bishop takes, threatening the queen. Bishop blocks, bishop takes, knight recaptures, so this is just an example. Queen takes pawn, attacking the rook. White castles. Knight to f3 check. King to g2. So we are forcing the king onto the diagonal of the queen. Knight to e1, double check. King to h3. Queen to g2 check. King to h4. g5 checkmate. So this is just an example, of course, but it shows how poor white's position is after this attack. So let's say if not pawn takes pawn is played, but bishop takes pawn. Now black may continue. Again, bishop takes pawn, threatening the queen. f3 to block. Knight takes bishop. Pawn takes knight. And queen h4 check. Forcing king to f1, so the king is in an uncomfortable position. Knight takes pawn. Knight takes knight. Queen to h3 check. King to f2. e4. And now the knight is lost. Because if the knight moves, white loses the queen. If queen to f1 to trade queens. Queen takes knight. Check. King to e1. And queen to d1 check, threatening the pawn on c2 as well. King to f2. Bishop to c5 check. King to g3. Bishop to d6 check. King to f2. Of course, the bishop couldn't have been recaptured because the queen is protecting it. Queen takes pawn, and so forth. So we can see that once again white is in a losing position. Let's take a look at the third variation. g4, knight to d4, queen retreats, and d5. So we've seen why pawn takes doesn't work and bishop takes doesn't work. Let's say bishop to e2 is played to protect the pawn. Now black may continue with bishop takes, bishop recaptures, knight takes, and of course the knight cannot be recaptured because the queen is needed to protect against the fork. So let's say queen takes, we get a fork. If king to d1, knight takes rook, and white may have hopes to trap this knight, but actually it isn't so, because if b3 is played in order to grab a free knight or to get an exchange sacrifice, black can simply continue with c6, bishop to b2 to try and get that knight. But now queen to a5. And if now bishop takes knight, queen takes a2, and black can simply get a minor piece back. So once again, we can see that the chess skill of the player will determine who will win with the Parham attack. If instead of queen takes knight on g4, c3 is played first to kick away the knight, black can play queen to g4 and threaten a mate on f2. So this loss of tempo will cost white as well. So this just goes to show how tricky the play can be, and that the stronger chess player will win. So what can we play? g4 doesn't work, so simply we need to continue development and continue to play chess. Knight to e2 because the queen is blocked on f3. The engine plays knight to a5, and we can see that the more we develop, the more the Parham attacking idea is fizzling out, because this bishop has no places to go to on the diagonal. So we go to b3, but it can easily be captured, and without the bishop we cannot get a mate attack on f7. Black plays d5, so he doesn't grab the bishop just yet, and this is a gambit move, because we have 1, 2, 3 attackers on the pawn with only 2 defenders. Now the move isn't that bad, and it's typical for play of gambit fruit, but I don't really like the move. Bishop takes c6 to get in some free development. I retreat again with no safe place on the diagonal. Bishop to g4, and this forces the second piece that is necessary in the Parham attack to move. So we can go to e3 or g3 perhaps. Queen to e3 was played. Knight takes bishop, and now of course we can see that there's absolutely nothing left of our Parham attack, and it's just a question of chess skill at this point. I'm up a gambit pawn, so I'm capitalizing on that. Pawn takes pawn. a5, perhaps to create outposts later on in the game. f3, kicking back the bishop. Bishop goes to e6. d4. So at this point, if pawn takes pawn, knight can recapture, or queen can recapture. Knight gets some free development. Black doesn't do so and plays bishop to d6 instead, developing pieces of his own, getting ready to castle if necessary. I take, forcing the recapture. Bishop takes. And now queen to g5, and we can see that I have an attack on the bishop on e5, but the bishop cannot move immediately because I get an attack on the pawn on a5 if he does. So black must retreat in a way to protect that pawn. Bishop to f4, nicely protected, in an attempt to get rid of that knight. h6, threatening the queen. Bishop takes, counterattacking on the queen. Now let's see what happens if queen takes bishop. Then I can simply grab a free knight, so that doesn't work. The only thing that black can do is grab the queen and I grab his queen. Now I am threatening this pawn, and this rook is needed to protect it. So unless black wants to lose another pawn, he needs to recapture with the king. And now black cannot castle anymore, and we can see that black has double pawns on the G file, and I have double pawns on the B file. However, I can simply undouble my pawns on the B file by playing B4, and the pawn cannot be recaptured because of the discovered attack on the rook. So black advances, but I can repeat the strategy by playing B3, and again the pawn cannot be recaptured because of the attack on the rook. Also, the pawn cannot advance, because if the pawn advances, it is simply lost. So B5 is played to protect the pawn. I grab the pawn, and contrary to black, my pawns have become undoubled. Rook takes. I don't agree with that move. Rook recaptures, and bishop takes. And now black's pawn structure is a mess. He still has his double pawns, but now he has two isolated pawns on the A and C file. Furthermore, because he cannot castle, there's no way for black to protect his A4 pawn in time. So knight goes to C3, attacking the pawn. Pawn cannot advance. King to E7, opening up the line for the rook. Knight takes. Rook to B4, threatening the pawn. C3. Knight to D7. And king to D2, protecting the pawn. Now, what is also possible is simply to castle, but with two minor pieces, one rook and a bad pawn structure, I prefer to use the king as a fighting piece. So I play king to D2. Castling also works, it's just a different playing style. Rook to A8. Knight to B2. Now, if black were to play rook to A2, I can simply play king to C2, and we can see that pawn and knight are protected, and the hanging pawns on the G and H file were blocked for black's rook. If I would have castled, instead I could have protected with the king on G1. So that's just a different playing style. Rook to A2 wasn't played. Knight to E5 was played. And now comes a move that needs some explanation. So let's see what would happen if I were to play a random move. Let's say H3. Then rook to A2. And there are two possibilities. King to C2 or king to C1. This knight needs protecting, and I cannot move because otherwise the G2 pawn is hanging. So let's say king to C2 is played. After knight to C4, we can see that white's knight on B2 becomes lost, because there are two pieces attacking it, and the knight cannot move because of the discovered check. So king to C2 doesn't work. Let's try king to C1. And if now knight to C4, again two attackers, and the knight is being threatened. If knight takes knight, bishop recaptures, and we can see backwards pawn on g2. So if rook to h2, bishop to d3, if say e5 random move, rook to a1, and the knight is lost. If knight to d2 is played, to try and save the knight, rook to c2 can be played, check. King goes to d1, and we can now see that our c3 pawn is hanging. So it looks like whatever white may try, he will lose a pawn. And that's exactly right. White will lose pawns. So it's time for white to give back material and give back pawns. So I play c4, deliberately sacrificing the pawn on c4. And the reason why I'm doing this is that now black grabs the pawn, I recapture, knight takes check, king goes to c3. This pawn is still protected. I'm down one pawn, but we have traded minor pieces. And this still gives me an edge with lesser pawns. Knight to d6, rook to c1, with perhaps a discovered attack on c6, g4, undermining my pawn structure. I take, knight recaptures, so I'm getting double pawns on the g file. King to d4, knight to g5, so now I have an attack on the pawn. Rook takes pawn, and rook to a2. And now sadly, all of white's pawns on the g and h file are backwards and are becoming under attack, and there's not much that I can do to save them. So I need to concentrate on this b4 pawn for the win. King to d5, rook takes the first pawn, h4, an in-between move, knight to f3, b5. Now let's see what may happen. If knight takes pawn, I can play b6, rook to b2, knight to a3. Now if knight to f3, rook to c7 check, king to f6, b7, knight to e5, king to c5, knight takes pawn, knight to b5, and this locks out the attack on the pawn, and white may promote. What else? If rook to d2 check is played, king to c5, rook to b2, rook to c7 check, king to f7 to protect the pawn. I advance the pawn, and once again I can bring my knight to b5, king to g7, knight to b5, same problem, I will promote. So you can see it's very hard for black to stop my pawn. If black tries something else and doesn't play knight takes pawn, but immediately plays rook to b2, then I can play knight to c3, protecting that pawn. Knight takes pawn, rook c7 check. It all ends up check, just about the same. Knight to d6, protecting the pawn, and so forth, and I can eventually promote. None of this was played. Rook takes pawn was played. So the game continues with b6, rook to d4 check, king to c5, rook to d7, and now we can see that black has placed his rook before the pawn. So he's not only threatening rook takes pawn on b7, but he may also block b7 in some cases. So now how to continue? And again, this requires a lot of thought. We may try rook to c7 to trade off rooks, but then let's see a continuation. It doesn't have to be played like this, but this illustrates why it will not work. Let's say king to d8, two attackers, king to c6, knight to e5 check, king to b7. Again, this is just an example. Knight to c4, threatening the pawn. Rook takes rook check, king takes rook, knight to c4, king to e6, king to c6, getting ready to promote. And now black can sacrifice his knight, and it doesn't have to happen this way, but he can always sacrifice his knight after the rook trade. King takes, and now simply black can take out the final pawn. And white does not have enough material to mate. So if you go back, after so much effort, the game will be a draw if you play rook to c7. The winning move is rook to c8. Now rook to c8 prevents black's king from going to d8 or d6, because those squares are covered. And now the idea of white is to move his knight to c3, d5 and c7 and block the protection of black's knight on d7, so white can promote. So that's the basic idea. Once again, there's a lot of chess skill involved, and the one with the highest chess skill will win the game. So if rook to b7 is played, just an example, this move wasn't played, I can play king to c6 to kick the rook away. So that's not possible. Knight to e5 is played. I play knight to c3, continuing with the plan. Knight to d3 check, king to c6, so in between check. Knight to e5 check, king to b5. Now it looks like black may play king to d6 because there's no longer protection on the d6 square. But if black were to do so and play king to d6, white can play knight to e4 check, forcing the retreat of the king. And if black were to advance anyways, we can simply fork. So black cannot step up with the king. Knight to d3 is played, and again I'm going to play knight to d5 or knight to b5, followed by knight to c7 eventually. And after that I can promote with the pawn, and there's no real way for black to stop it. If now king to a6 is played, for instance, knight to b4 check, king to a5, and there are no more checks. Knight to d3, knight to b5, knight to e5, knight to c7, in between check, king to a6, and in desperation, black should grab the pawn and lose a minor piece, and white will have won the game, but this move wasn't played. I played knight to e4 instead, chasing strategy, and we will see why in a few moves. Black plays f5, and now I play knight to c5, and now I'm attacking the rook, and we can see that there are no safe places on the 7th rank. This forces the exchange of knights. Knight takes, king recaptures, f4, so white must be worried to promote quickly in order to prevent black's promotion, or to remove defenders of black. Rook to h8. Now, if black were to try and promote, let's say f3, b7, rook takes, rook to h7 check, king moves, black loses the rook, f2, and we can see that white is in time to stop the promotion. So clearly this doesn't work for black. Instead, rook to d8 was played, rook takes, king recaptures, and now I need to fall back with my king for the threat of the f-pawn. King to c8, king to b7, I grab the pawn, black grabs the pawn, and I can take out the final pawn and promote, and that will be the end of the game. So playing the Parham against strong engines and strong players definitely isn't easy, and it requires a lot of inherent chess skill in order to be successful. But it is a great opening to play, and a great way to improve your game. So you may give it a try on any level. So I hope this helped you understand the Parham attack. Thanks for watching, and have a great evening.